In institutional units, assets and liabilities, because that's what we have. We acquire assets and we incur liabilities as institutional units. Thus, the completeness of a statistical database, which I think is the ultimate goal of every country, every body that compiles statistics, will depend on its ability to distinguish among types of flows within and between institutional sectors. Such a database, if we could put one together, would record, for completeness, the following dimensions of any transaction. Remember, we talked about the bread. I was buying the bread from the person who was selling it. And so we can think immediately that that transaction has the following dimensions. It is who, which would have been me, does what, purchase bread, from whom, the baker, where at the baker's shop, when, at the time when I purchased the bread, at what price, the amount I paid for it, and for what purpose, which was to satiate my hunger. Okay? So every transaction that takes place has each of those elements in it. And hence why we can think of that database as exactly this huge puzzle of bits. Think of being able to say that everything that occurs in a market economy has those 7 dimensions. And I can create one database and I can just dump those 7 dimensions of everything that happens into that database. Then I have a record of everything that has transpired in the entire country, in the entire world, the entire universe throughout time. Now, when you do that, you say, well, the thing obviously becomes unfeasible to manage. And that is where the statistics comes to place. It simply says, I need to be able to focus my energy on something of interest. And focusing my energy on something of interest effectively says now, I need to use a basic principle of homogeneity. How do I classify things in a way that makes sense? And so we revert to the principle of sectors. And we can start talking about the government sector, we can talk about the financial sector, we can talk about the household sector, and then we can talk of doing a simple search in that huge data warehouse and say what are all the transactions that individual sector one did during a particular period of time, and I can search along any of the dimensions that we talked about. So what this allows me to do is I can drill down into any specific level of detail that I would like, but it also provides me with insights into transmission mechanisms. How do individual sections interact with other sections? It allows me to see contagion issues. How would the activity or behavior of one sector transmits into another? So I can look at, for example, shifts in patterns of intermediation from banks to non-bank financial institutions, if I can trace the transactions that individual X undertakes when he does a transaction and moves from one institution to another institution. So to get some semblance of manageability into this big warehouse that we talk about, macroeconomic statistics are presented in what we call analytical accounts. So there's a general government account, which presents the position of the government sector versus all the other sectors. The who does what to the who. And it's with a view to interpreting those for purposes of decision making. And so normally the government would think of certain concepts like government revenue, fiscal balance, how much is its lending. And so as a result of this, we can have a statement about what the government is doing relative to everybody else. Now, a comprehensive measure of an economy, since we need to be able to measure everything that's going on, has to recognize that economic agents, institutional units, undertake transactions. Transactions are the bits that we said the economy undertakes in markets that follow a system of rules. As such, the nature of those transactions, the functioning of the markets, including rules on conduct and operation, and the interlinkages across markets and agents are therefore material. And each of those aspects need to be measured. So while the nature of economic transactions and linkages are the core set of macroeconomic accounts, the functioning of markets tend to evolve, driven, we could say, proactively by innovation and reactively by events, leading to modifications in the rules and regulations. And so consequently, when we talk about measurement, what we need to measure is not just the activity of buying the bread, but the fact that I was a good law-abiding citizen and I did not purchase the bread and didn't pay for it, because there's a system of rules which say if you are hungry and you want to buy a bread, then you need to exchange money for the bread. So the SNA itself is not a complete system. Not complete because it operates within boundaries. There's a production boundary. So if I cook for myself, it's not included in the SNA. And it also has a financial asset boundary, which says that the assets that show up on balance sheets do not include those that are excluded from balance sheets, or what we typically call off-balance sheet items. In addition to those, there are some other accounting systems, like environmental accounting, which records the interaction between the economy and the environment, allowing analysis of the implications for sustainability of different patterns of production and consumption, or the development of industries that use environmental resources. Because those are not included in the standard macro statistics, you could think of a similar parallel system for developing environmental or non-observed economy type statistics. The global crisis highlighted that a crisis can originate in any sector, including the household sector, and underscored the relevance of balance sheet analysis, the need to monitor channels of intermediation, and the importance of information disclosure and oversight. The crisis highlighted the role that complete recording of transactions could play, aka more information disclosure, in understanding the full set of vulnerabilities that we actually face. Consequently, I think the crisis has provided a very positive spur to statistics, because we can certainly see if we knew more about certain aspects of transactional activity that was taking place, we would have been in a much better position to understand the crisis at the time when it occurred. So what then are the attributes of good statistics? We've argued of what it can actually do, its role in decision making. The attributes can be described in one simple phrase: timely and quality data. That's what makes good statistics. So how do we measure quality? The IMF has a framework that they use called the Data Quality Assessment Framework, which provides a structure and common language for good practices and internationally accepted concepts and definitions in statistics, including those of the UN's Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics and the IMF's Special Data Dissemination Standard and the General Data Dissemination System. The methodology in the DQAF, that's the Data Quality Assessment Framework, helps to identify and document in a systematic manner practices in statistical production, ranging from institutional arrangements to data collection, compilation, and dissemination. Through regular updating, the framework reflects internationally recognized good statistical practices as they evolve. The framework has 5 dimensions: assurances of integrity, methodological soundness, accuracy and reliability, serviceability, and accessibility. It also covers institutional environments, statistical processes, and characteristics of statistical products. The broad framework has been applied to each of several different data set-specific frameworks, including national accounts, consumer prices, government finance statistics, balance of payments, and even household income in poverty analysis. In addition, there are standards and codes that are benchmarks of good practices. The IMF and the World Bank have recognized international standards in at least 12 areas that are related principally to our work, and I shall mention a couple, including accounting, anti-money laundering, banking supervision, corporate governance, insolvency, and creditor rights. In assessing countries' observance of those standards and helping them implement reforms where needed, the IMF and World Bank aim to improve the functioning of the economy as well as investors' decisions, and ultimately to promote greater financial stability and help prevent financial crises. So now that we have a sense of what constitutes good quality, the question which is of direct relevance to you as you deliberate over the next couple of days is how can we produce good quality statistics? I propose the concept of an organic statistical system that looks at not one component, but all the components that make up a good statistical system. So first, there must be a comprehensive legislative environment to provide the legal foundation for the compilation and dissemination of data, free of influence to maintain integrity. The institutions need to be independent, established with adequate resources, and that includes physical, human, knowledge management architectures, including systems and procedures. And those institutions should be committed to confidentiality, impartiality, and objectivity. Because of the multiplicity of collection points that are typically used in the collection of statistics, the information architecture must embody coordination. To be effective, collection points need to subscribe to harmonization of principles so that the whole can be a seamless aggregate of the parts. The outcomes must be interpretable so as to inform the vision and the intent of those statistics. It has to be streamlined yet comprehensive in scope so that initial, secondary, and ancillary linkages can be traced. And it has to be dynamic and flexible to adapt to the changing needs of users. This can include widening coverage as necessary, and coverage here talks about the perimeter of the coverage of statistics, updating of national accounting principles, monitoring of financial instruments that are outside the financial asset boundary, and gathering of information on counterparties. Some of those were patently missing during the recent crisis that we had. So that takes care of the legal and the institutional side. What about the compilers? The compilers must be trained in the highest standards of methodology. They need to be diligent in the execution of that methodology and be subject to monitoring or self-regulation according to best practice standards and codes. I suggest a peer review system which can be used periodically to assess the effectiveness of the system with a view to identifying recommendations for improvement and enhancing credibility. Of note, we need to take a close look at the costs of compilation as well as the burden on respondents in the process of compiling that data. We cannot, of course, ignore the users. And so users need to build trust or acceptance in the data. And consequently, we need to have a very proactive education program so that users can act with minimal uncertainty and provide feedback on new or evolving needs so that the compilation process can serve the purpose of the foundation of decision making. So institutions, legal, compilers, users, all have a role to play in this organic system, which I call an overall statistical system that would then fulfill its purpose of being the foundation of sound decision making.